Thanks very much, and I want to thank all of you who have presented here today. And I think I probably speak on behalf of everybody, and I certainly think that most of the population would agree that the evidence here today is probably the most astonishing evidence we have heard in front of the COVID committee. And I have to say, the hairs were standing on the back of my neck when Phil Ni Sheaghdha said we were both applauded and abandoned, because that is exactly what happened. This is absolutely astonishing evidence about what happened to our frontline workers and those to whom we are extraordinarily grateful. And of course, we do face a huge challenge because we have a backlog of non-COVID treatment that has to be met, and we also face the possibility of another resurgence of the virus. So, Ms Ni Sheaghdha, I just want you to state again to us, please, that up until the 22nd of April, until the HSE removed from its website the guideline that face masks are not advisable unless you're symptomatic, that up until that point, face masks were not issued to healthcare workers in settings where COVID was known and where they were dealing with it. Could you just confirm that for me, please? No,
what I'm saying is that in circumstances where COVID positive, the status of the patient was not COVID positive, they were not recommended. If the patient had a status positive COVID-19, yes, face masks were recommended at varying degrees and depending on the procedure that you would then be engaged in. For example, if you were performing an aerosol generating procedure, face masks were mandatory. But there were many circumstances where the status of the patient was not known, and therefore face masks were not recommended. And there were many areas of healthcare where testing had not been conducted and face masks were not recommended. For example, public health nurses attending clients in their own homes were not advised. It was not mandatory for them to wear face masks at that time. And I'm rushing on because we know that they should have been. Absolutely. And at that stage, we knew that you could pass the infection while you were asymptomatic. At that stage, we knew. The evidence that has now come to life is that obviously asymptomatic transmission is a feature of this virus. So in other words, you can have no symptoms, no temperature, etc., and you can still be infectious. And then the figures of infection among healthcare workers, the highest globally, and most of them, or a third of them, were nurses and midwives. That's quite shocking. And I'm no doubt this must make you guys feel very angry. It's about over a year ago since I met you on picket lines when nurses were striking for their pay increase. Could you just tell us in yes or no, have all nurses received that pay increase as a result of that strike? No. Thank you. And can you answer for me, when you said you dealt with 5 different departments at one stage, did you feel that you were being passed from Billy to Jack and that there was a parcel being passed around the place and nobody taking responsibility for answers to the queries and the proposal you were making? I think they were looking at it from a very singular point of view, which was public health concern, and not looking at their responsibility as employer. And if I might add, we're now dealing with another department, the Department of Business Enterprise, because COVID-19 is not classified as an occupationally acquired illness under our health and safety legislation, and it has to be, it must be. We have written to, under the umbrella of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, we have written to the Minister with Responsibility, Heather Humphreys, and I have been circulated with a response from her department last Friday, which advises that the regulations will not be altered to include COVID-19 as an occupationally acquired illness. We believe that's wrong, it's a mistake. Every worker in this country, not just in the health service, but every worker in this country who acquires COVID-19 because they are at work, that is an occupational illness. It's an occupationally acquired illness, and the Health and Safety Authority must amend its regulations in order to allow it investigate why. We are looking for the reasons behind these figures. We do not have the regulations that would require the Health and Safety Authority come in as an independent statutory body and examine them. They must have. I have to interrupt you, Ms Ni Sheaghdha. That's absolutely more astonishing evidence that you're giving us here, but I want to ask you one final question. We received an answer to a PQ that less than 180 staff were recruited under the Call to Ireland, and we know that doctors and nurses are very, very angry about how they've been treated, and when they've been recruited, they were recruited under agencies which treat them very, very differently to the HSE. Now, facing into the current crisis,
do you think that the state are missing out on a huge opportunity here, not just to deal with COVID, but to increase the capacity of the health service overall, which is urgently required?
Deputy, thank you for that question. I think from our submission, we have set out the figures. We know that we were operating before COVID with less than nurses and midwives, over 1,000 less nurses and midwives than we had in 2007. We have now a big problem because we've set out the figures. We are very reliant on recruitment of nurses and midwives from non-EU countries and EU countries as well, but non-EU was our biggest registration single block last year. So we know that due to travel restrictions, they will not be travelling to Ireland to work here. We also know that the UK has made specific travel arrangements that allow Irish workers travel to the UK, and they are very aggressively recruiting our graduates. We have promised our graduates nursing and medicine posts on graduation, but they've had that promise for the last 3 years, and it is always a battle, particularly when you have a health service that is funded on an annual basis and then implements a moratorium on recruitment in the first quarter of the year, as they did last year. Denied it, said no, there is no moratorium, but there was a moratorium. Of course there was. So the first thing we have to ensure is that there is no moratorium on essential healthcare workers ever again, because when the chips are down, we need every single healthcare worker who is available and willing to work in this country. There's no point in asking them to come back from Australia in the middle of a pandemic. They shouldn't be forced to go to Australia in the first place. So we do have a problem. We have set out a number of points on that very issue. The parties who are now looking to form government, and those are: increase your undergraduate places, never again introduce a moratorium, and make sure you treat those that work in the Irish Public Health Services, nurses and midwives, in an equitable manner with all other professionally qualified healthcare workers.
Thank you, Ms. Ni Sheaghdha. Thank you, Deputy Smith. Deputy Shanahan.